This month we're going to talk about Kanban and Kanban for software development in particular. I am TJ, and I know many of you from the older user groups before meetings, previous meetings, and our agenda tonight is going to be, we're going to look at the history of it. After that, we're going to look at some basic concepts of Kanban Board. We're going to see Kanban in action. We're going to look at different scenarios, how we can use this board to identify with some of the problems we have in software development. And last, we're going to look at Kaizen and continuous improvement culture and how we can implement this culture. What are some of the problems that if we were trying to implement this culture in our organization, the problems we will face and how we can overcome them. Once again, I'm TJ. I'm a chief architect at CodeBits. We give custom software solutions, consultancy, and Kaizen and Kanban consultancy as well. And those are my Twitter accounts, our company accounts, and our company website. So we also have a new channel, this cute logo that we have. We have a YouTube channel, so if you can just get on to channel.codebits.com and take a look at the videos that we have. We are planning to have more videos soon with the different concepts, mainly around the Kanban and Kaizen culture. So where does this, the whole thing, Kanban, come from? Okay, it all started with the World War II. The problem for the United States when they entered World War II was they had to have people, manpower, to send to war, right? So what happened is everybody, the male, basically, males just went to war. And the problem was those males were also the same people who were working at factories, who were working at companies as managers, executives, supervisors, foremen, whatever you name it. All of a sudden, hey, we have this force that needs to fight in front. That's great, we have them, but guess what? We need to supply them from here. Without supplying the army, they're useless, they cannot fight. We need to give them guns, we need to give them tanks, we need to give them bullets. So what are we going to do? We have no man left in the country, so to speak, right? So they went to, hey, hold on, we have women. So they actually came up with all these posters saying that's why we see a lot of women in the posters too. They're like, hey, come on, join us. Come to the factories. Come to executive levels. Come to management. And let's supply our men so we can win this war. But then another problem raised, and that was this new labor force was inexperienced. They did not really work at factories. They do not have the executive experience that the men had who were fighting right now. Because of that, US government started a program called Training Within Industry, which is TWI in short. And they had some advisors, executive advisors that give, that advise these factories, these inexperienced labor force and management. And basically they said, look, do not do big changes. Do not really try to recreate the wheel, reinvent the wheel. Just work with what you have. Just go and do small steps, small improvements. Do not try to buy new machinery. Just look at your existing machinery. Try to improve that machinery. And also talk to these people. They may be inexperienced, but they may have great ideas. So labor and management work together to accomplish what we need to accomplish. And if we look at history, we will see that, hey, this worked because US was able to supply their army with everything that they needed, and eventually, how the war went. After Second World War, though, another problem for the US has arisen, and as you know, with the Russia and all that, there was two different polars in the world. And now US thought, hey, I need to have a buffer between me and Russia and North Korea. So as you know, the world is round. So because of that, United States is actually extremely close to Russia. And they said, hey, you know what? the best buffer that we can have is a strong Japan. So a strong Japan was in their interest. So what they did is all these advisors that were advising with that TWI program to the management during the war, they actually sent them to Japan to give, to train their executives on how to manufacture stuff. And one of these guys was this Mr. William Edwards Deming, and he is a hero in CodeBits in our company. We value his ideas a lot. And he's at a god status in Japan. And he is practically the inventor or forefather of what we are going to see today. Not necessarily the whole methodology, but the philosophy comes from him and the direction. So while we're looking at him, this guy goes to Japan and trains the executives. And one company, Toyota, is a Japanese company, manufacturing company, listens to him, and then they say, you know what, we have some problems in manufacturing. We have to get more efficient in what we're doing, and we just came out of War II, so we really don't have much time to fiddle around or experiment with different things. So they go to United States to look at supermarkets. Supermarkets really interest them because supermarkets work on very low inventory and what they call just-in-time delivery. Supermarkets actually just go and you buy something from the supermarket. As soon as they reach a certain stock level, they reorder more stuff, and they do not stock huge levels of fruits and goods and all that stuff. And so they said, hey, let's look at these supermarkets and let's see how we can implement this to our industry. And they actually came up with an idea. So they said, hey, you know what? We will actually use what supermarkets use to direct their people. When you go to supermarkets, you see aisle 1, sugar, coffee, tea, and all that. They say we use a similar system, but we will use the system to tell us what's going on within our production lines. And they call this a Kanban board. And this is a Kanban board, an example of Kanban board. And Kanban board, by the word definition in Japanese, means signal. So basically, hey, we need something to signal us, to tell us what's going on within our manufacturing system. So they implemented this system and they call it, hey, okay, we will have a just-in-time and we will have something called automation, which is the machine actually just fixing itself, taking care of itself in a way. And this is in brief how the whole operation worked. So just imagine that you have a person who is just assembling the car doors in Model A, right? You have 10 car doors at any time. So those 10 car doors, they come, the cars come in front of you, and you assemble the car doors one by one. Once you reach 5, once you use up 5, and you have 5 car doors left, there is actually a little card in between those car doors that tells you, hey, you need to order more. And then you take that card and you take it to the car door assembler, the manufacturer, and you give that card to him. The whole system works that while you're working on the remaining 5 car doors, right, the manufacturer builds the other 10 doors, and as soon as you're done with your 5, those new 10 ones are delivered to you, and that is called just-in-time delivery. And that is actually coming from the supermarkets. They work with almost the same system. So we have today the same example in IKEA. When you go to IKEA, you get the cards and you take them to the front to pay for the cashier and all that. But once you reach the very low level, you will actually see a red card saying that, hey, we're out of this. Please take this to the cashier and we will reorder for you. And that's kind of a Kanban card as well, just signaling you that we're out of this, we need to restock this again. And the whole idea of that, the Kanban board that we have seen, this just-in-time delivery, if things do not work somehow, if there is a delay, the whole idea is to find the bottlenecks. We want to see where the bottlenecks are. And with this technique, the Germans got onto this technique. The Japanese, as you know, the Japanese manufacturers started to dominate the world from 70s onwards. So it worked for them. But to do that, and this applies to our software development too, in order to see where these bottlenecks are, we need to look at two things. One of them is we need to visualize our process. We need to see what's going on. Even though it seems so simple, it's very hard to put down your workflow on a piece of paper or just to visualize it and go through it step by step. And the second thing that we need to do is actually look at waste, where the waste happens, and we will see what waste means. First, we need to look at visualization, we said. This is really important because as humans, we are visual creatures. The text is processed 60,000 times less or slower than image, as you can see on the last one. And as you know, the children recognize the images long before they can start to speak, they can start to talk. The images are simultaneously deciphered, which is very important, and most of our communication is actually non-verbal, just through our gestures and through our body language, our mimics and all that. So visualization is really, really important for what we do. The second thing that we said is, hey, with this, we need to look at waste. So what is waste? What do we call waste? Waste is basically anything that does not improve the quality of the product, or that does not reduce the amount of time and effort it takes to produce that product, or it may do all these too, but it doesn't give any real value to the customer. The customer did not even ask for it, right? So that's all waste from an organizational point of view and from our software point of view too. I want to go through waste right now, and what we will see is they will be coming, this waste again has its origins in the manufacturing industry, but we will apply them to software. The first one is defective production, or a defect product. And these are basically the bugs we have in our products, right? We're producing something too. And the more bugs we have, the more broken it is, and it'll look to our customer. And then we have an overproduction problem, which means that we write more code or functionality than required. That will mean, as you know, that we need to go and maintain this code even though it's not required by the customer or by the product. This will go into, hey, we're providing no value to the customer. Then we have waiting. And waiting applies to us in the form of, hey, we're waiting for budgets to be approved. We're waiting, starting a project for whatever reason, maybe the documentation or the signature is not ready yet. Excessive requirements, documentations, reviewers, approvals, the more bureaucracy you have, basically, the more waiting you will have in your system. And at some point, I'm sure we all went through that in our software projects. And then we have neglected talent, and that is another form of waste. What it means is, in your team, everywhere, we're not machines, so we do not just code. We all have other interests, we all have other skills, we all have other hobbies that we do almost as well as our own professions, right? So learn about your team, know your team, and see if you can apply some of these skill sets back to your team. Because one, those are the things by their nature, because we're interested and we're doing it because we want them, we like doing them, and your team will like doing them too. So it won't come as a extra burden. So look at your talent set, look at your skill set, and try to utilize that. If you don't, that's a waste. The next waste that manufacturing talks about is transportation. For us, it is actually task switching, and we know how deadly task switching can be. And with that, I actually want to demonstrate this to you in a little game. You all have our pens and a little paper in front of you. If you can now just play a little game. So please think of your favorite person or letters from A to J. You can have your favorite person, or just think of letters from A to J and numbers 1 to 10. I will have a timer up on the screen, hopefully. And with the timer ready, we will have 2 goes at this. In one of them, I would like you to write each word on separate lines. So basically, you will write, as you can see in the bottom here, A through J in one line, in one go, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, up to 10 on the second line. And then we'll stop. Or you look at the timer and see where you are. In the second one, though, we want to do context switching. And what we want to do is, we want to write the first line on A. Then we go second line, we write 1. Then we go to first line, we write B. And then the second one, we go and write 2, C, 3. We're just going to switch context. This is a very, very simple thing. And you will see, even with that, the difference will be high. So let me switch to an online timer here. Give me a minute. Okay, with the first one now, please start. Just remember, you're going to write one line, A to J, or your favorite person's first name. And then the second line, 1 to 10, your favorite person's last name. And go. Is everybody done? I'll wait until 30 seconds just to give people enough time. And hopefully you're done by now. Now, please record your time whenever you looked at it so you know where you were. Let's clear that up. Let's start a second one. And this time, do the context switching, please. Remember, A, or your favorite person's first name's first letter on the first line. And then the second line, you go to the number or your favorite person's last name's first letter, and then the second letter, and so forth. And please start now. So for this one, I'll wait until 45. Unless you're a Superman, this should take longer. Good. So let's switch back to our Okay, so when you look at your results, was your second one much, much, much slower than your first one? And this is and that's the way it should be. And we did it in a very limited way, very limited context, right? In a much more complicated projects, this test switching penalty that we pay actually is much, much more. And I played the same game, and I added some different elements to it. The first one is what we have done, up to 10 letters, and I use the letters and the numbers, up to 10 letters and numbers. The second one, I actually extended to 20 letters and numbers. So 1 to 20 and A to whatever the 20th letter is, which I don't remember right now. But the third one, I went back to 10, so 1 to 10 to A to J, but as a third project, I added Roman numerals, which gave a bit of complexity because we're not that accustomed to writing in Roman numerals. You know, those are the ones that go 1, I, IV, and all that. So it gets a bit complicated after a while. And then I did the same one with the Roman numerals up to 20. And in each one of them, the orange one, which is the context switching one, was much, much, much slower. And that is the penalty we pay, and that is the ultimate waste that we have, I think, in software development today. That when you're working on something, you get a phone call, that little Outlook email pops up saying that, hey, you've received whatever, Jetstar flights, and you go and take a look at it and all that, bam, you know, you pay the penalty, and before you know, maybe half an hour is gone until you can go back. So that's one of the biggest wastes we have. And continuing with the waste, another waste the manufacturing has is inventory. With the inventory, it comes to us as dead code, because that's our inventory. Those are the functions, not the excessive functions that we write, but the functions that we write that are not referenced anywhere else in our code. So we have some functions that goes, especially if you use Visual Studio 2013, and I strongly advise you to switch to that just for this matter, because it actually shows you your number of references that each method gets. It's really, really good in that sense. So this is the one that how we do. And if you don't have Visual Studio 2013, at least just run, just use Resharper. Resharper does this too, that it tells you, you know, if your methods are referenced or not, or just run code metrics regularly. But this is a big waste too. And everything that's not, again, referenced is something that more or less we need to maintain, because the code is there, it makes it unreadable, and it makes it cluttered. The next waste that we have is motion in manufacturing, and this picture is probably familiar to all of us. And this is the one that we are trying to find information from customer, from the business consultant, from everybody that we can, the specs. This also has a historical problem for us, the developers. Historically, the developers do not really like to talk to the customer too much. They let the business consultants and all that do it, but that actually is a big problem in my opinion, because like we need to break this shell, because then you're putting somebody else in between you and the customer, and it almost becomes a what is that game called? Chinese whisper? You know, by the time it gets to you, the specs might be different, or the specs might be, or the requirements might be the way the business consultant understood, not the customer. And that's why the meetings with the customer and all that are really, really good. And then we have excessive processing. And this excessive processing in us is basically, hey, are you doing manual deployment, or are you doing automated continuous deployment? Are you doing manual testing, or do you have some automated testing, automatic testing? Are you doing test-driven development? Are you doing behavior-driven development? These are the ones. If we are not doing any of this, if we're doing everything in a manual way, that's a waste. That means that we're spending time on things that brings no value to us, to our customer, to the product at all. And all this leads to downtime, basically. That's why I wanted to use the manufacturing words, because they actually spell the acronym downtime nicely. So we need to get rid of waste. So there's two things up to now, to sum it up. We need to visualize our process, our workflow, so we can get rid of the waste and we can become more efficient. So how do we do that though? Where do we start? Well, in Kanban, there is a concept called Gemba. I know it's a bunch of Japanese words right now, but Gemba literally means workplace, where the production is happening, where the production happens, where the value to the product happens. And this is actually a real photo. It's not photoshopped or anything. That's a Gemba. Managing this will be a bit hard though. But in either way, this is where you need to go. So to visualize the process, you need to be in where the work is happening. And then you can see the steps, and then you can talk to people, and then you can actually know what people's problems are, which we will touch a bit in Kaizen. This Gemba, by the way, you can have more than one Gemba in any organization. So if you take a restaurant, their Gemba is two places. One of them is where they actually serve the food, right? That's where their interaction with the customer is happening. The other is the kitchen. The kitchen is actually where they create the value of the, where they create the product. But the product by itself, kitchen, does not mean much without the other Gemba, which is where they serve the food. If you have a great food, you go and dump it over the head of your customer. That really doesn't bring you any value, does it? So basically, you can have many, many Gembas. In a hotel, the reception, again, the restaurant, the cleaning service, everything. So you have different Gembas you need to look at. In our software development, which we will just go to the department, the team, and when we're doing the stand-ups and all that, that's where our Gemba is. So that's where we need to go and take a look into our processes. So all good, all great. What does a Kanban board look like? This is a Kanban board in its simplest, dead simplest form. So in anything that you do in life or in any day, you have these three steps. You have stuff to do, you have stuff that you're doing, and you have stuff that you have done. No matter what you do, I can assure you it's going to be in one of these three steps. But it doesn't have to stop there. So a Kanban board can be like this. So here, for example, they have, hey, to do, and then we'll analyze. There's some development going on, testing, and then done, where we can decide what the definition of done is. Or it can be a bit more complicated, right? Obviously here the guys are, hey, we have a different process. It depends really on your process and on your workflow. And this is really unique to every organization, every department, or even every project. So it can differ. So do not get stuck on one way of visualizing your workflow. Just go with the flow and see what the natural workflow is for any project, department, or organization. Or it can be as complicated as this, and this is very, very complicated. But let's go and take a look at our own Gemba. Own Kanban board, well, which is Gemba right now. This is the Gemba for us. So we're going to use this kind of Kanban board. We have a backload on the very first column, and we're all familiar, I'm thinking, with the backlog terminology that, hey, this is basically our to-do list. This list can be long, this list can be limited. It depends on you and what you agree with your product owner. And then we have an analyze column, and on that analyze column, we have divided this big column into two smaller columns. We call it doing and done. So basically, when we're doing something, we want to show in that column. When we're done with what we are doing, we want to take it to the done one, right? And the same goes for the development. And then we put it into test. And then if it passes the test, it goes into ready. And if it's all ready, at some point, we want to put this into production. So in this way, hey, we say in this company, whatever company we are in right now, or this project, we say, you know what, our steps are, we analyze some stuff, we develop this, we test it, and then we put it into production. Are there any questions about this? Are you guys familiar with the Kanban board? How many of you have seen a Kanban board before? It's actually nice, half. How many of you are working with a Kanban board right now? Okay, we have 3 people. Are you working in Kanban board with in a Scrum context or just as a Kanban, direct Kanban approach?
Just by myself, use Trello to organize pretty much everything.
That's good. That's good. And you, sir?
In Scrum.
In Scrum. So we have one person who works with a Trello to organize, I'm thinking, your day-to-day operations, and you work with the Scrum, just to, you're using the Kanban board as visualizing where things are happening, which is a great help for that matter. And I think we had one more. Yes?
Yeah, I'm by myself with the Trello board.
Yes, and so we have two developers. We have 3 out of the probably 12 or 14 people that we have, and 2 of them are using it for their own personal continuous improvement or day-to-day operations, and then one we have with the Scrum board, which Scrum teams use the Kanban board a lot, just their visualization aspect of it. So, okay, cool. So this is all new. Are there any questions then about the workflow, the guys that are not familiar with the Kanban board, or is it okay? Shall we go on? Okay, I'm thinking, since everybody is going like this, I'm thinking we're good. So with that, the Kanban board kind of works like this. What you do is, very different from Scrum, you actually do not push any work onto your developers. When the developer is ready, let's say this, whoever is doing the analyze, when they are ready, they actually pull that card, pull that work into their column. We do not push anything, so to speak, other than unless we're in that little columns. So in this case, if you look at the first little sticky note, the analyzing, whoever is doing the analyzing, actually pulls the card into doing, and that shows their product manager or project manager or their team leader that, hey, you know what, this guy is working on this right now. When he is done, he's actually going to push it to done to tell the developer, basically, or one of the developers that, hey, this is ready for you to work on. And then the same thing happens to the development. The developer, when they're free, when they're done with their existing work, they're going to pull that card into that column to show that they're working on this. And that's basically where the visualization comes from. You just see the process as it happens. So in some of the electronic forms, they actually do hide the backlog and the production columns, so you have more space for the others. And this is also called the just-in-time delivery, just like the Toyota system. Because once you're done, the analyze, or in this case, the developer, once it's done with the work, the system should work in a way that one of the items from analyze is ready for him, so he can pull. So it's delivered to him just in time for him to work, just like the car doors example. Are there any questions at this point? Good. Is it clear as a mud, the whole system? Good. So we can start our Kanban board tomorrow. And maybe there should be a homework for that. But what do we do? I mean, in this case, okay, great. In this example, it looks like we have what, 4 or 5 little sticky notes, and hey, we pulled all of them. That kind of goes against all that waste and context switching, isn't it? I don't know how many people we have, but let's say we have 2 analyzers in this company. So can they work on 5? Doesn't it go against all this waste stuff that we worked about? You know what? It actually does. So what we do is we introduce something called WIP, W-I-P, work in progress, process limits, right? And these are actually represented in the parentheses. Next to analyze, we have 2. Next to development, we have 3. Next to test, we have 2. Now, what this means is, analyze in any column that it has, the whole big column, I'm not talking about the small columns, the limit applies to big one, and you can actually detail it in a much larger thing too. So you can say, hey, analyze, I have 2, doing 1, done 1, right? So you can detail it in a hierarchy, but in this case, what we say is, hey, at any time, analyze cannot have more than 2 items in it. So if we have 2 analyzers, at any time, we know that they will be working on 2 things, which means one is working on, each thing. Same goes with developers. I don't know how many developers we have. In this case, let's say we have 3. So at one point, each one of them will be working on one thing and one thing only. They're not going to have 2. And the reason for this is, these WIP limits is the context switching that we talked about. If you work on just one thing, if you focus on one thing, it goes much, much, much faster than switching between different user stories and items and all that. And it also goes with the quality. Until one item is done and it's good quality, you are not going to let that pass you. So you're not going to get any defect item, product, user story, or whatever epic feature, whatever you're working on right now, get through you. Right? So, with these WIP limits, we're just going to limit people. How do we come up with these WIP limits? At the beginning, I would advise to keep them small. So let's say 1 per 1 person that you have on that team. And the reason I say this is, even though they may do more, it will immediately show you if you have any bottlenecks or if you have any slack. It will immediately show you. If you have 2 analyzers, and let's say they're super good and they can do 2 things, they have the capacity to go through the items very quickly, you will immediately see that because they will go through items and keep pushing to their done where the developers cannot pull them. And you say, hey, you know what, we have a problem here, which we will see in a few minutes, how these things work and how we can see where slack is, where what we call column starvation happens, which is, hey, the column is empty and it cannot get anything. So, I think I need to click this. As you can see, the analyzers took something, they tried to get the 3rd one. No, it can't happen. It has to go back. And this little animation was just to show what I've been telling. And I hope it made it clearer. So let's have this. Let's go back to this again. We have 2 analyzers working on 2 stories. And let's see how this thing will flow. And hey, one of them is done. Developers took them, and he immediately took the 2nd one. The 2nd analyzer is done with that. The 2nd developer took it too. And this analyzer guy is done. He took 1. The other is slacking a bit. He should have taken the last one too. The developer is good. Okay, the analyzers, I don't know, they might be updating their Facebook statuses. They're a bit late on this, the last one. Okay, this went quick. It looks like we have a little bit of a problem that took a bit longer than it should, right? So we can see this. And they're about to, testing is almost done. They did it to ready. If you really, and looks like they're done. And this could be the sprint, sorry. Or it could be the project. If it's the normal project, if you're not using the Scrum, and this is not the sprint, like we do in CodeBits where we don't use sprints, we don't use Scrum, so we use the continuous. It means there is a continuous flow of items that are coming, right? So it will never be this empty once you start using this system. But in the Scrum, I'm assuming once you have the sprint, then everything basically resets, rinse and repeat. and it's going to start from the beginning. Each one will work just the same. On some companies, what you can do is between ready and production, here we put it directly to production. Maybe it's our internal product, we need it to. You might actually, if your client requires acceptance test, right? Hey, they need to see and they need to sign off on these items. You can actually have another column between ready and production that says client accepted. Or because of that, ready is basically you're done, and the client can have another 2 little columns that says doing done. So you know what the client is working on the acceptance test, and you know when they're ready. And in that case, when the client is done, signs off with the acceptance test, then you put it into production, right? So I only wanted to mention that because this is not set. This is just a workflow that I kind of made up, I came up with. Whatever your workflow is, whatever your working history relationship with your client or internally, your company culture, you need to come up with that steps and the columns. So let's see some of the bottlenecks here. How does a Kanban board show us where the bottlenecks are? And when I say bottleneck, as you know, a bottleneck is basically where things just get smaller. So the flow will still be there, but it's going to be at a diminished capacity. And we're going to use this bottleneck a lot. 2 things actually we're going to use. One of them is bottleneck, and the other is pull, because we're always pulling work that we need to work on. How do we decide, before I go any further, how do we decide what to work on next? This is done historically by you take the highest card. So the highest card is the one that needs to be worked on. But you can, again, come up with your own system. You can prioritize them by number. You can even use user stories. I've seen teams do that, right? User story points, sorry. You can use the user story points, and whoever is highest, you can pull that. That's, again, up to you. It's something that you need to come up with. You need to decide with your team how your development process should do that. So going back to our Kanban board, we're looking at this board, and we are, okay, we have 2 testers working. It looks like the development, 2 items are done, and Analyze is working on some stuff, and we have a couple stuff on our backlog. You know what? If in this case, the developer is done before the analyzer finishes his work, guess what's going to happen? I'm basically going to go into some idle developer issues. So here is a bottleneck. Here is a problem that is about to happen. And I don't know if it's going to happen yet. Hey, maybe both 2 of these analyzers just put the 2 of these user stories back to done, right? Up to done. And once they push, hey, I'm good. But this is a potential problem that I need to keep an eye on, as you can see in this case. So before this happens, if I go back, before this happens, I can actually go and say, hey guys, to analyzers, it's all collaboration. Everything we do, whatever system you use, it could be Kanban, it could be Scrum, it could be Agile, XP, anything. It all comes down to communication and collaboration. Basically, we need to talk to each other. Once we talk, we usually solve the problems very, very easily, right? So here, maybe the project manager or the team leader will go to analyzers and say, hey, how's that going? How is it looking? Are you going to be able to done in time or not? And or with the developer, it's like, hey, can we do something about these two idle guys? Can they help with testing maybe to get these testings done? Because it looks like if the analyzers put it, we have another problem. Even if the analyzer guys put the 2 user stories into done, we still cannot pull those user stories because of that VIP limit, that's 3. So we have actually potentially another problem here, that the testers are taking too long, more than they're supposed to. Cool. So in this case, as I said, there is no item to pull. So what are we going to pull? This is a bottleneck. It doesn't give you the solution, but it brings this up. It surfaces the problem for you. And then you can do something about it. You can talk to your team. And the whole idea is, how can we prevent this from happening? The whole idea is we need to have a continuous flow on this board so we can produce these items. So another bottleneck here. The developers are working, as we said. The testers are working. Analyzers are done, just as I described before. I described it as a developer. But because the developers are working still and analyzers are done, analyzers cannot take another item onto their column because of that limit too. So they cannot pull more work, which means now I have the problem of, hey, I have two guys, in this case, if I have two analyzers, I have two guys sitting idly. They're not doing anything. And that's a waste, right, from our definition, because I'm paying these guys. What can we do in this case? How can we prevent this? And this may very well happen. As I said, the whole idea is going back and say, how can I prevent that this doesn't happen again? So it all comes to that. So with that, let's put some characters on our board. So let's have a bit of fun now. We have the lady, we have the product owner, or our project manager, whatever you want to call it, the team leader. We have two analyzers just thinking under a tree with the apples about to hit on their head. And we have, on this case, we have 3 developers and we have a tester. I should have put another tester there, but maybe he is taking a bathroom break. So he's gone right now. But one of the important things is, as you can see, if you look at the developer column, we do not have to have a certain way. That's one of the flexibilities of this Kanban system. I actually have 2 stories. So instead of having one developer sitting idly doing nothing, I paired 2 of them on a problem. Maybe that problem is bigger, or it's still better that they do some pair programming than one of them is doing nothing, right? So, and on the ready section, you can either have manual deployment, maybe you have an admin that who deploys stuff, or you can have the automated deployment, and that's what the Resharper does. But on this case, we have another problem. The tester is idle, right? So something has happened that, one, maybe the problem was too big. Why did I have to pair these guys, the development column? I had to pair them. They're working, 2 developers are working on one story. Maybe hey, is the user story too big? Is it too complicated? Why did this happen? That's the question to ask always. Why did this happen? And because of that, I have a tester who is sitting idly right now. So what does tester do if this happens? And this can happen. This is real life. Okay, in this case, you look at your tester skill set. We said, hey, neglected skill set. So you look at your tester. Can he develop? Sometimes the testers are developers as well. If that's the case, maybe I can actually pair him up with the first user story, the first developer, so I can have a bit of thing going on. If that's not the case, can he help the analyzers to make it a bit faster? Because as you can see, I actually have a Slack on my development. Or can he write some of these automated tests maybe? Hey, instead of sitting, write some deployment scripts, write some automated tests, or if none of them work, actually, then the question to ask is, what can I do to make this tester valuable, add value to the team, to my team? And this could be retraining. He might be interested in something, updating documentation, updating knowledge base. There will be something, I can assure you, once you look deep inside, you will find something that he can do, because there's always something to do. If nothing else, hey, documentation, where we always lack. On another, sorry, question?
I've got 2 questions.
Oh, sure.
Specify says, I've been doing Scrum for about 2 years now, so I have 2 questions. How can you tell when a task will be done, and what's the estimation process? And how can you determine the velocity of the team since there are no sprints?
The estimation and the velocity is coming up, right? And how can you determine done is, the definition of done is basically just as same as Scrum, anything. You have to have a definition of done that the whole team and the product owner agrees on. You need to know when you're done. In our case, in our company, we work on features, minimum marketable feature, the thing that's called. So basically, all these things, instead of user stories, for us, they're MMFs, and they have multiple user stories. I think in Scrum you call them tasks, or in TFS. I think in some of the agile circles they call them epics. Everybody calls them differently, but basically we have a group of things that we work on, and that is the minimum marketable feature, which means that adds some value to the product. It's just not as a user story, but it's some kind of a feature that adds some value to the product. And until that's done, we don't do. But even then, to define the limits of that epic or minimal marketable feature or minimal viable product, MVP, you need to talk within your team, talk with the project leader, product owner, and you have to come up with that definition of done. Good? That answers? Cool. Okay, if you're looking at this Kanban board right now, we see that, hey, we do not always have to use the same color of post-its. In this case, it's actually post-its. I don't know if it was clear or not. But even if we're using the electronic form, we can use different color coding to identify different processes or different items that we're working on. Remember, we talked about how visual creatures we are. So that gives me a lot of information without really going anywhere. Once you start working with this, you're going to get used to colors. One thing I do not suggest is using different colors for every little, even between sprints or something. It's better to standardize this, because after a while, it will come as a second nature to you. So do not make a feature, in this case, yellow if you're using Scrum from one sprint or one iteration, and it's purple in the next. Use the same. And even between projects, because your team is kind of the same, I would ask you to standardize this. But anyway, going back to our thing, in this case, we have features represented by yellow. We have the bugs represented by red. We have change requests, which is a bit different than, it's just a change request to do, maybe it's a bigger thing, but in this case, it was important for us to have its own category. And we have a maintenance, which we are testing right now. The important thing here is, again, these are not set. These categories you need to come up with on your own, with your team, talking with your team, and you will know this. So one of the things we have is, what do you do when you hit a bug? And in this case, everybody is happily working, but oh my God, our second tester who's back from his bathroom break actually had hit a bug. So what do we do in this case? Well, it turns out there is about a couple ways we can go about this. The first way that we are looking here is the Kanban board has something called swim lanes. Swim lanes is basically just adding another row to the Kanban board. And in this case, that where it says urgent is our swim lane. And that's our urgent row. Basically, anything that's urgent that needs to be taken care of immediately is going to be put there, right? And when we put it there, we know that in our team we talked, again, we decided on this, that hey, if we have stuff there, we're going to expedite them. They do not necessarily need to be bugs. Anything that's urgent. It can be coming from the CEO, right? That's as urgent as a bug, that a feature request, which we will see. And so what will happen with that is, in this case, he hit a bug. And because that feature was already analyzed, it actually bypassed, if you realize, bypassed the analyze column. It actually straight went into dev. So what will happen here, as soon as one of the devs is done, because we don't want to have context switching, right? So as soon as, at least in this case, we don't want to, as soon as one of the devs is done, what they will do is they will go down and take care of that urgent item that is now sitting on their column. So that urgent item has a higher priority than anything that's in the analyze done section. So that needs to be taken care of first. And you can play with this. If you don't want to be in that dev doing as I'm doing, you can put it back into analyze done. But the important thing is, hey, that urgent swim lane or row is populated and we need to take care of it as soon as possible. And once we do that, it's actually going to be expedited. So it's gonna take the express lane. Any questions on this? No? Continue.
So why is why express line, like any requirements to test the bug before it goes to ready? So yeah, why it's actually why processing the testing?
It's gonna, from once it hits a bug and it goes into development, it's gonna follow the same procedure. So the developer has to work on it. He has to put it to done, and then the tester, he knows that he needs to test first, by the way, before anything else. The tester has to test this again. Sorry, basically, I apologize. The question was, hey, once it gets into the urgent lane, what is the process? Is it going to be tested again and all that? Yes, it's going to follow the same procedures. And there's a reason why we wanted to follow the same procedures. In a few slides, we will see that we actually time every time these things go from column to column, which will answer our cycle times and velocity and all that very soon, right? So, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. So another thing that we can do, we're now back to, we resetted the board to the time when our tester hit the bug. At this time, what we can do is what the manufacturing plants call stop the line. Just to give you in quotes, Toyota introduced a system basically because what Toyota said, hey, to have the best quality that we can have in our factories, we are not going to let any defected part of the car to go into the next lane, to proceed into the next lane. As soon as we see a defected part that we are working on, that we need to assemble or whatever, or in the inspection, and the idea is actually to get it before it gets to the inspection being our test, we are not going to let this go to the next lane. And what we're going to do is actually we're going to stop the line, stop the whole manufacturing process. And everybody, when they came up with this, everybody thought they're crazy. They're like, you're crazy. You're not going to be able to produce thousands of cars a day or a month by stopping the manufacturing line continuously. But they did it, and we know where Toyota is today. And the idea was though, hey, okay, I stopped the line, but I also go and take a look at how can I make sure that I don't stop the line because of this problem again. Because if you don't do anything, if you don't improve, as we will see in the second half of this talk, then all you're going to do is just stopping the line all the time, basically, without doing anything, and you're going to hurt yourself eventually. But this is the same thing. Here, our tester, we said that, hey, whenever tester hits something, we are not going to have any swim lanes. We don't have anything here. We don't have an urgent bit. Actually, we want you to stop the line. And he's going to say, hey, I have a problem here. So once he has a problem, all the developers actually is just going to go and go to that tester and help. They're going to say, hey, how can we help? Let's fix this. So the idea is this whole production or this whole development process has come to a halt until that bug is fixed. Does that make sense? It's clear? So, but what we have to take from there is, later on, we need to go back and say, why did this bug got into, and a showstopper bug apparently, right? Maybe a big one too. Why did this get into test to begin with? This is very different. Do not, let's not confuse this with a test-driven development where you get a lot of reds before. That's happening on the dev doing bit, right? The developer is doing that himself. We don't, unless you have a process of, hey, you write something, if it compiles good, I will give it to testing, then you will have a lot of problems anyway with this kind of approach. But the developer has to do their testing anyway. They do, but also the tester person does other kinds of testing. They do the UI testing and all that stuff too, if the developer is not doing automated UI. So this is another situation where you stop the line, everybody rushes in to help. Another case that we have is, again, everybody is working fully. We're very one big happy family, but all of a sudden one of our developers hit a roadblock. This is not necessarily a bug, and it can be a bug though, a bug that the developer cannot handle by him or herself. Or it could be an issue, maybe it's beyond the developer's skill set. It could be many, many things, as you know. And in this case, two things will happen. If you don't do anything about it, and you may not, you may let the developer work this out, or maybe give them a day or something. Again, this is a policy that your team has to come up with. So in this case, let's say that we let the workflow continue, and what will happen is the two developers at the top will just gonna pass their, their items eventually to done, and the testers will be done and they will be getting. But the whole system was designed that, hey, we know that we have 3 developers. The 3 developers can be supplied by 2 analyzers, and the 3 developers then their stuff supplies the 2 testers, and the system is just works. We perfected it over time with, with basically seeing what limits work. If one of the developers hits a roadblock and stops, what's going to happen is eventually, the testers will become idle because they are expecting a workload of 3 developers. Right now, they're getting a workload of 2 because one is stuck. It cannot go on. And the analyzers will eventually become idle because now they're expecting to give work to 3 developers. The 3 developers are supposed to pool the work, but instead only 2 are. So basically, there is going to be an oversupply there. And eventually, you'll hit a bottleneck. And then your developer says, hey, you know what? I need help. And the same thing happens with the testers. Maybe once the developer, one of the 2 developers at the top is done, you can tell them, hey, can you, maybe it's a more senior developer, you can tell him or her to, hey, can you go and do some pair programming and let's see if you can rush. Or you can say, hey, stop the line at the start. Go and fix this, whatever their problem is, fix it immediately, and then continue. But then again, this is a process, this is a policy that you will need to come up with. Is that okay? Cool? Then we have another case. I'm just going through scenarios that can happen in our software development lives that we talked about. Hey, we have developers are done, but the testers are not done yet. So something has happened that the testers are taking longer than they should. And this is not necessarily, you need to look at the human factor too. We had this in one of our projects not long time ago. It may not be always related to the tester's technical capability or something. You might have this situation because let's say those 2 testers were sick and they couldn't work 3 days of the week and something. But whatever the reason is, and you need to find the reason, you have a problem here. The developers, they cannot take any work because they hit their limit. The testers are the bottleneck here. They're slowing the whole thing down. So in this case, the developers, one of the things that the developers can do is they go to the testers and say, hey, what's up? Why is it taking you so long? And the developers go, la, 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 and the testers, and then testers go, and the developers go, hey, Dan, can we help you? Because usually developers can test too, right? Can we help you? And then the tester says, yes, of course you can help, but just do not test your own code. Test your friend's code, right? Because your own code you'll probably pass or something. We don't want that to happen. So that's just an other scenario, but in this case, the developers can help with the testing, and if that is the case, you can even, because this is happening, and you are actually increasing the capacity of the testers, because what you're doing is you're assigning those 3 developers temporarily to testing column, right? If that happens, because you now have a bigger capacity, you can increase that VIP limit of test to 5. Temporarily. So that can happen. Once you do that, the developer column will be start, or maybe you want to say you don't want to stop that. You want the production or the development to continue. You say, hey, 2 developers go and help with the testing of the 2 items, because it will still speed up the process, and you will use one of your developers to take what's being done in analyze. So still the development continues, nothing stops. There will always be a solution. If you can't find the solution, shoot me an email. We'll help you. Or what we have, VIP requests. I told you that, hey, something urgent is not necessarily a bug or an issue. It could be a VIP request. This VIP request can come in the form of your CEO wanting a feature, right? Your CEO comes to you and says, hey, we have this thing on the backlog, it's number 17. I want this to be done pronto. And then your team leader says, yeah, but we don't work like that, right? If you want, I can put it up, but basically then it will go through the whole process. Once they are done, they will just pull that up. I can put it at the top. And the CEO goes, no. I want it done pronto. And I don't know, maybe there's a business reason for it. And he says, look, there's a company who is interested in injecting cash into our product, and we need to demonstrate this in whenever, right? Whenever is ready, as soon as it's ready. Well, guess what? Now it's a company decision. It's a business decision. You have to obey. You could not just develop, isolated from the rest of the world, and you then say, hey, okay, then we'll put it. Then we will treat this as another urgent item. So an urgent item can be the same, but of course at this time, unlike the bug, it didn't go into the development column. It actually went into, if you see it, the backlog urgent one. So because analyzers still need to analyze this item. With the bug, they have already done that work, and it speeds up. Again, though, it has to go through the development testing and all these procedures. So all this is done, and we said, hey, we need to get the highest card. That's historically what we do. The highest card is the higher priority, and at least that's how we work. But there are some times that you can come up with a policy in your team. How do I handle different cards? One of them is you can use the user story points if you want to give more value to one of the features. Or you can say, hey, I have a feature over maintenance. So in this case, for example, we have a tester who is about to get an item to test, right? So normally, historically, he should get the green one, because that's at the top, that's the higher priority. But we have a rule. We say, hey, we have feature over maintenance. So basically when this happens, the feature one, who is in number 2, has a higher priority. So you have to work on the feature, because feature maybe brings a new value to the customer that we need to deploy and all that. So in this case, they actually take the feature one, the number 2 one, and the maintenance will only get worked on when there are no features to work on. But that's a policy, again, you have to come up with. And you know what? There's a mistake on this board. Can anyone tell me what the mistake is? Yes, 5. Correct. Those two gentlemen, please see me at the end of the show, the Ultimate Edition user group. But yes, there is a mistake here. That is, this Kanban board actually is incorrect in the way that on the dev column, there is 5 items, which means that we did not obey our own rules. Can that happen? By your teams, maybe things need to happen, or again you have a superstar, whatever, and things are small. That can happen, but it's not advisable because it tends to hide stuff from you, and it tends to hide bottlenecks that you may have. But correct, so 2 gentlemen. Good job. So you have not been sleeping. Awesome. All right. Now let's come to our cycle times. Does anybody know what Disneyland wait times are? Have you ever heard this item? If you're a theme park freak like me, you know what they are. Basically, they're the ones that at any point you have a little board that says, hey, you have to, from here on, you will have to wait 1 hour 45 minutes for that 30 seconds of joy, right? And that's called Disneyland wait times. And that's what we use actually for Kanban most of the time. I told you that each of these cards, each of these items, whatever user stories, features, things that you're working on, when they go over from column to column, they're actually calculated, they're actually timed. So with that time, you actually then take the average or whatever that when that feature is deployed, or once you say, hey, I will just take a month or 2 months, or user stories, 10 user stories when they're deployed, whatever you decide with your team, the stop point, the milestone should be, you time them up until that point. Then you take an average of them, and then you come up with a time that says, hey, from here on, I can more or less predict that once an item is in the backlog, it's going to take, in this case, 24 days to reach to production level. Because that's my average time. Is it super deadly accurate? No, because guess what? Life happens. There's a lot of unknown variables in life. But it still gives a predictability, especially to the product owner, that we have seen and used with great success, because they actually value the predictability more than a deadline. They need to know when things are going to happen. Of course, if you go and say, hey, yes, that login thing you asked me for, we're going to deliver you in 8 months, yeah, that's not going to go, right? It's still within logical limits. But the product owners, we find out, value predictability a lot. And I don't know if that answered that question that gentleman was asking online. Hopefully he's still listening. And here's some examples of those calculations. Let's say I have 24 stories completed in 3 weeks. Well, that means I'm completing 8 stories per week, right? And if I have 160 stories in my backlog, I can pretty much predict that I'm going to finish that backlog, whatever I have, in about 20 weeks, give or take. That's very simple, their own calculation. And then you can do other stuff too. You can look at your weekdays, how many weekdays you have, how many developer weekdays you have, then you can come up with the load factor, what they call an XP and all that, how much developer working days you need per story and all that. There's a lot of calculations that you can do, and we do it, and it gives you great predictability and great insight into how your process is working. I will put all of this into SlideShare too. So what does a card look like? Right? We see all these little post-its looking like things. And the reason I use post-it is almost all of the physical Kanban boards that I showed you were using post-its. It's because they're easy to move around. But our cards are, on its simplest way, basically you have your deadline in red, if you have a deadline. that will be there. On the left-hand side, you will have a work item or whatever source code that control that you're using if you're tracking that one as well. In the middle, you will have, I'm assuming we all know this, as a blah, I need to do blah, our user story in the middle. And the two on the left bottom side is A and D, and that gives dates. And going back to our board, if you remember our board, that says that, hey, this item has entered, it's pulled into analyze on the 4th of November, and it's pulled into development on the 10th of November. Now you can put another one here if you want to. You can say, hey, analyze is put on the 4th of November, and let's say, and it was done on the 5th, right? And then it's pulled into development on the 10th. Then you can say, hey, comparing with other development item, whatever that developer is working, and usually you will give who it was assigned to and all that too. When you're tracking, it's not just this time tracking. You need to track when it was pulled into different columns, who pulled it, and who worked on it and all that. But then you can pretty much come up with, hey, this each one took this much time, right? And which helps with our cycle times, by the way. Each one took this much time for us to complete. And you can actually see how your graph looks like, how your the whole progress looks like. And the icon that we see is, if you're using a real card or not, you can use an avatar or an icon that each developer takes, and it can have more than one. If you're doing pair programming, or maybe it's a feature or epic that more than few developers are working on. So with that card in mind, so what do we do? It's not really that different from Scrum, and the guys who do Scrum, I'm assuming that are using the Kanban board are doing the same thing that we're doing. We get in front of the Kanban board, electronic or physical, and we talk, right? Hopefully we don't talk more than 10 minutes, but we talk. We basically do the same stuff. We do daily stand-ups. We see where we're going, where the things were. We also reflect, because there are no sprints, right? You might think there are no retros. But no, we actually come up with, hey, you know what? We're going to talk about every week, every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks. We're going to also, on top of our daily stand-ups, we're going to reflect how things went. Or maybe you reflect after every deployment, release. Again, something that your team has to be comfortable with and you come up with. How do you demonstrate? Again, this is something you do with your product owner, that you say, okay, we're going to demonstrate this where we are every day. And with the demonstration though, our cycle times helps us a lot. After working on a project for a while, we actually can pretty much tell the product owner that, hey, that feature you wanted, we can demonstrate it to you fully in 3 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever your cycle time is. I think in our board it was 24 days or something, 21 days or something like that. So we can say, hey, we can do this for 21 days for you. So basically, collaboration has to happen. Remember I said we need to communicate. And yes, the whole thing comes down to communication. We need to talk. We need to talk between each other. We need to talk to the team leader. We need to talk to the product owner. But we need to talk. So collaboration is extremely important for us, and which actually finalizes the Kanban part of this presentation. And next we will go into Kaizen, which is a continuous improvement culture.
Did you get all that? We'll take the SSW TV quiz and test your knowledge now.